Divyavani is a philosopher, a Catholic priest, said this: joy is infallible sign of the presence of God. Where there is joy, that means there is God. And Alexander White observed, we all tend to hang heavy weights on the thinnest wires. I think that makes it very explicit that we look for joy on things that pass away. So today we are going to reflect upon the theme, joy in good times and bad times. So my dear friends, what are those thinnest wires that we hang our joy on? French philosopher Voltaire said, I wish I had never been born. And the nurse who attended him said, for all the wealth of Europe, I would never want to see another unbeliever die. So he was an unbeliever. So unbelief does not bring joy. Lord Byron, he was a British poet and also an aristocrat, squandered his wealth on scandalous love affairs. And then just before 3 months of his death, he said, he wrote this actually, the worm, the canker, and grief are mine alone. You can imagine what he went through. So pleasure does not give joy. There is no joy in pleasure. There is no joy in unbelief. There is no joy in pleasure. And what else? Joy Goud, an American railroad tycoon, because American railroads brought a lot of money in the 1800s. He was having 72 million US dollars those days. Imagine 1800s. So he must have been a rich man. So dying, what did he say? I suppose I am the most miserable man on earth, he said. So there is no joy in money. A lot of people think that they will be joyful if they have money. But there is no joy in money. If there was, why would he say that? 6 weeks before Elvis Presley died, a reporter asked him, when you have started your musician career, playing music for the first time, you wanted to be, you said, rich, famous, and happy. Are you happy now? He asked. Then he said, I am lonely as hell. I am lonely as hell. So there is no joy in popularity, which many people crave for. And is there joy in glory? Alexander the Great, in 12 years, he never had a defeat in his battles, and he conquered the whole world, the then known whole world. And it is said that after that, he wept in his tent, not even in his home. He wept in his tent, saying, there are no more worlds to conquer. So, my dear friends, this tells us that there is no joy in any of these thinnest wires that we hang on, the heavy weights that is life itself. So today, the gospel is taken from the concluding part of Jesus' 3 final discourses after the Last Supper. After this, Jesus makes a long prayer for his disciples. Then he goes into Gethsemane to pray personally. And there he goes through the agony. So this is an intense emotional moment of Jesus' last words, what he said today. There was sorrow in the hearts of the disciples because he was leaving them. And there was also sorrow in the heart of Jesus because they will forsake him very shortly. And he also saw the sorrow of the disciples when he will die on the cross. So, my dear friends, there is sorrow because you lose a friend or a beloved, or you lose position, you lose power, you lose maybe mobility even. Today, for example, in the event of Corona, people cannot move. They are like homebound, house arrest. So people are becoming restless and there is sorrow. But the problem is this sorrow can turn into despair, which is sinful. Sorrow is common to everybody. And when it turns into despair, there is no hope there. You become resentful and you become angry. And sometimes you become depressed. And that's what is happening today to many people. And what do? They end their life, commit suicide, take their life. So my dear brothers and sisters, how do you prevent sorrow becoming a despair? So that is what Jesus says. Sorrow I will turn into joy. He does not say he will take away, but sorrow will be turned into joy. What kind of joy, you should ask? It's not a superficial joy. Your heart shall rejoice. It's not just about joy just peripherally. No, your heart, it's inside. It is not something that some people watch a movie to be joyful, happy, or entertainment, or they go for a game, or they eat something and they get little satisfaction, or they drink. So their joy is gone after a while. So, but what Jesus gives is not a superficial joy. It is a joy even in sorrow. Hebrews chapter 3 verse 17 to 18, if you go and read. The joy in sorrow. And my dear friends, not only when there are no troubles, no trials, no upsets, no failures, no disappointments, but every time this joy is there, it lasts. And why does it? Because joy that Jesus gives puts sorrow out of mind. You forget. Not only you forget, you go into a different mindset, I would say. And Jesus gives the example of women in travail. What is this speaking to, referring to? Childbirth. So only those women know who have been through this travail when they give birth to their children. What happens? What they say is the intense pain that no one can bear, 10 times of a muscle cramp, because that's also a muscle. And my dear friends, a moment before the birth, the pain is so intense. But after a moment, Jesus says, after a little while, what happens? She does not remember the anguish she goes through. Why? Because the child is born. When she sees the child, when she hears the cry of the child, and when she sees the child and holds the child in her arms, all that pain is forgotten. So that's what here, your joy puts sorrow out of mind. So my dear friends, this is what Jesus is speaking of. 1 Peter 1:8, inseparable joy. And then, where does it come from? So it lasts, it gets you out of, so that's what the biblical meaning was. And then, where does this come from? What is the source? Jesus is the source of joy. Why? Because he says, you will feel sorrowful, but when you see me again, not you see me, when I see you again, because it's not we seeing, it's Jesus seeing us. Because Jesus seeing continues even in the midst of trouble that we go through. Even in sorrow, Jesus sees you. So this is what makes us joyful. And that is what happens. In Jesus' name, we also pray. In the 3rd century, a man has written this. What did he write? It's a bad world. Very, very bad world. But in the midst of this bad world, a secret I have learnt, or quiet and holy people have learnt. What is the secret that these quiet and holy people learnt? Is the joy which is better than, at least 1,000 times better than any pleasure of sinful life. What is that joy? They have overcome the world. These people are called Christians. I am one of them. So, my dear friends, so this is what is called Christian joy, in spite of troubles. How do we experience this joy in our life? First of all, you should have prayer life. First thing in the day, you should start with prayer. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast your cares on him. Relationship between joy and prayer is very strong. My dear friends, Mother Teresa says from her life, the fruit of prayer is joy. So, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, 16 to 17, also we hear, pray without ceasing. So there are two things here, joy in sorrow, in the midst of sorrow, because God is there with us, but joy in trusting God's promises also. God's promises. Because God is seeing in the midst of troubles, but at the same time, God also promises. That is what makes you listen to Jesus. I will see you again. And he says, I have overcome the world. So my dear friends, just think about the saints. What did they do? What was that kept them joyful in the midst of sorrow, in the midst of pain? Those martyrs in the midst of martyrdom. That's what is called divine humor. What is it? What they believed was, what they are suffering is nothing compared to what they are going to inherit. That's why I am talking about God's promise. We should always remember our difficulties here. First of all, being a Christian does not mean that we will be spared of difficulties, as some of the prosperity gospel preachers talk about. But in the midst of difficulties, as the woman in travail, because they will pass, they are not forever. And the second thing is that God's promise. So, it is pale in comparison what they suffer in comparison to what they get, the everlasting joy. And that is the reason what is called the disproportionate in nature. So, what you get for what you pay. So, my dear friends, in America, usually people talk about you get what you pay for. That means you pay more money, you get a better value. But here, what you go through is a pale comparison to what you get. So that's what should motivate us today, my dear friends, to be joyful in good times and bad times.